Lauren walked into the living room, her eyes scanning the space like she owned it. Her smile was polite enough, but there was always something beneath it, something Grace had learned to recognize over time. In the beginning, she had hoped things would be different. Lauren had arrived as Mark's bride, the perfect daughter-in-law, warm and attentive. But that warmth quickly turned cold. Grace, sitting quietly in her corner, watched as Lauren reorganized the cushions on the sofa again. It was a small thing, but it was the third time today Lauren had done it. Each time Grace arranged them, Lauren found an excuse to redo them, as if Grace's touch wasn't good enough. Lauren caught Grace watching and gave her a thin smile. "I think this looks better, don't you?" Grace nodded, not saying a word. What could she say? These small gestures of control had become a daily pattern. It wasn't about the cushions. It never was. At dinner, when Grace served her signature dish, one that Mark had always loved, Lauren barely touched it. "It's a bit oily, don't you think, Mark?" she said, looking at her husband. Mark, too tired to notice the subtle jab, shrugged and kept eating. Grace's heart sank. She wasn't looking for praise, but the constant dismissals were beginning to wear on her. In the kitchen afterward, Lauren didn't even ask Grace if she needed help. Instead, she left her to clean up the mess alone, retreating to her room with Mark. Once again, Grace's place in the household felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece. As Grace washed the dishes, her thoughts drifted to how things used to be. Before Lauren, she had run the household smoothly. Her relationship with Mark had been strong, grounded in mutual respect. Now, Lauren seemed determined to make her feel invisible. Grace knew it was happening. She could see it in every side comment, every time Lauren corrected her or took over her tasks. But for Mark's sake, she had said nothing. He didn't seem to notice the growing distance between his wife and his mother. To him, it was just the typical adjustments of married life. But for Grace, it was more. It was the gradual erasure of her role in the family. Late at night, in the quiet of her room, Grace allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had raised Mark with care, ensuring he would have a strong foundation. Now, watching him with Lauren, Grace wondered if she had done something wrong. Had she been too involved? Was that why Lauren seemed so intent on pushing her away? Grace had always believed that peace in the family was more important than asserting herself. She had chosen to endure Lauren's behavior, hoping that over time, things would change. But with every passing day, the hostility only grew. Lauren, on the other hand, felt a different weight. She hadn't grown up in a household like this. Her own mother had always been the undisputed head of the family, a position Lauren had admired. Now, in her new home, she felt like she had to fight for that same level of respect. Grace had been here long before her, and Lauren feared that her presence would always be overshadowed. Lauren's actions weren't born out of pure malice. She felt threatened. She wasn't used to sharing authority with another woman in the house. Deep down, she feared that if she didn't establish herself as the new center of the household, she would forever be playing second fiddle to Grace. The subtle manipulations, the dismissals, these were her way of claiming space, of proving to herself and everyone else that she belonged here. But beneath that, Lauren was insecure. Her own mother had constantly compared her to others, making Lauren feel as though she was never enough. Now, in this new family, she felt like she had to prove her worth all over again. Grace, with her years of experience and natural authority, represented everything Lauren feared she would never be. And so, the tension continued. Grace, patient and enduring, waiting for a change that never came. Lauren, desperate to assert control, afraid of being sidelined. All the while, Mark remained oblivious, too caught up in his own life to notice the quiet war being waged between the two most important women in his world. As the days passed, Lauren's behavior escalated. It wasn't just the small comments or passive dismissals anymore. Lauren had begun interrupting Grace during family conversations, cutting her off when she tried to speak or subtly mocking her opinions in front of Mark and others. Each time Grace offered a suggestion or tried to share her thoughts, Lauren would laugh lightly and say, "Oh, that's such an old-fashioned idea. We don't do things that way anymore." Mark, caught in the middle, would glance nervously between the two, unsure how to handle the tension. At a family gathering, things reached a boiling point. Grace, trying to engage in the conversation, shared a story about Mark's childhood. It was a cherished memory, one that always brought smiles. But before she could finish, Lauren interrupted, saying loudly, "Oh, come on, Mark's not a child anymore, let's talk about something relevant." Laughter rippled through the room, but Grace felt the sting. Her words, her presence, dismissed in an instant. The humiliation was sharp, and this time, it wasn't just in the privacy of their home. It was in front of the extended family. Grace's smile faltered, but she stayed silent, retreating inward while Lauren continued, unaware or unconcerned by the impact of her words. Mark began to notice the tension more, but his frustration grew as he failed to understand the full scope of the issue. On one hand, he loved his mother and respected everything she had done for him over the years. On the other, Lauren was his wife, the woman he had chosen to build a life with. He felt torn, unable to balance the two women. Whenever he tried to discuss the matter with Lauren, she brushed it off, claiming that Grace was overreacting, that she just wasn't used to change. "It's nothing serious, Mark. Your mother's just a bit old-fashioned, you know," Lauren would say with a dismissive wave, leaving Mark more confused and frustrated. The tension in the household weighed heavily on Mark, but he was too busy with work to fully address it. He found himself caught between defending his mother and supporting his wife. Every time the two clashed, he felt further from the solution. He wanted peace, but he had no idea how to create it, especially when Lauren never admitted there was a problem. For Grace, that family event was her breaking point. She had endured Lauren's undermining for months, holding her tongue out of love for her son. But being humiliated in front of the extended family had hurt more than she expected. It wasn't just about her feelings anymore. She realized that Lauren's behavior wasn't going to change, and her patience was wearing thin. Grace had always believed that peace in the family was worth any personal sacrifice, but now, for the first time, she doubted if she could continue like this. The weight of constant disrespect had become too heavy to carry alone. Despite reaching this breaking point, Grace still hesitated to confront Lauren directly. She feared that speaking up would create a rift between her and Mark, and she couldn't bear the thought of her son feeling forced to choose between his mother and his wife. So, Grace kept silent, though the internal struggle was becoming harder to manage. Meanwhile, life continued as usual on the surface, but hints of an impending crisis began to surface. Mark's business, which had always been steady, started showing signs of trouble. There were whispers of a major deal falling through, and financial stress began creeping into the household. Mark, usually calm and collected, seemed more distracted and irritable. He spent more time on the phone, dealing with work issues late into the night. Lauren, focused on her ongoing battle with Grace, barely noticed the subtle shifts in Mark's mood. There were other signs too, subtle but undeniable. Bills that had always been paid on time were delayed. Conversations between Mark and Lauren about household finances became shorter and more tense. And yet neither woman fully grasped the storm that was about to hit. While Lauren continued her efforts to dominate the household, and Grace struggled with her inner turmoil, the external threat was quietly building in the background, ready to strike. The tension simmered, both between the women and in the larger family structure. The impending crisis, though still vague, was slowly beginning to overshadow the ongoing conflict. Something was coming, and soon, everything would change. Mark's business began to crumble faster than anyone could have anticipated. A crucial deal that he had been relying on fell through, leaving the family in an unexpected financial freefall. It wasn't just a minor setback. It was devastating. There were loans to repay, clients to answer to, and the threat of losing their home loomed closer with each passing day. The pressure mounted, and Mark, once so confident and capable, found himself unable to cope with the sheer magnitude of the problem. Lauren, always used to having control within the home, now felt completely out of her depth. She had never dealt with something this serious before. It wasn't about managing a household or winning small battles with Grace anymore. It was their entire livelihood at stake. As Mark grew more distant, focusing entirely on trying to salvage the business, Lauren realized that she didn't know what to do. The usual confidence she had in herself evaporated, leaving her anxious and panicked. For the first time, she found herself staring into a crisis that she couldn't solve on her own. The more she tried to handle things,